thank you very much for coming onto this interview. Could I guess you quickly explain who you are and what you do?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. I'm Adam Bandt. I'm the leader of the Greens and the Member of Parliament for Melbourne.
Amazing. So, I guess to start with, a kind of broad question: what are you hoping to do if the Greens got to hold some balance of power this election?
Keep Peter Dutton out and get Labor to act on some of the big issues that we're facing, like the housing and rental crisis, the climate and environment crisis, and the broader cost of living crisis, which I think is a sort of a manifestation of a big and deeper inequality crisis that's going on in our society at the moment. So there's a number of areas that we'd like to see like change in particular. On housing and rents, we've got to start tackling the underlying causes of the housing crisis, the tax breaks that are tilting the playing field against renters and first home buyers, the unlimited rent increases, but also some really practical things as well we'd like to get done, like wiping student debt and moving back to that system of free education that we had, that the Prime Minister was able to enjoy. Taking real action on the climate, like stopping them from opening new coal and gas mines. So that's surely the most important thing. Like in tackling a problem is to stop making the problem worse. And so we want to see action on that front. Plus, I guess more broadly, I would say that we've got what would traditionally be called a social democratic platform, that where we're saying let's tax the big corporations and billionaires and use that money to fund essential services and make sure everyone is able to afford the basics. So we're heading towards what experts are saying is going to be a minority parliament. We've got the Greens are in a strong position in the Senate. We're in a really strong position and within reach of winning new seats right across the country. So it could be, I think this could be the election that's really a once in a generation chance for people to elect a parliament that where a lot of these ideas will get put on the table and we'll get a chance to get some action on them while keeping Peter Dutton out.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a very impactful election as, for the first time, I think young people are really becoming politically motivated, and that age demographic can make a big difference. I think they resonate with a lot of your policies. I guess to kind of get straight into a criticism I have seen levied, but also one I would say I believe, is that all of these amazing policies are going to cost money. And I've heard the Greens say that they want to make corporations pay their fair share. That's an awesome goal, but I guess what's the plan to actually make it happen when there are these complicated tax loopholes and kind of multinational ways companies can get away with not paying their fair share? What does it actually look like to make them pay?
Yeah, so let's talk about why we're in this situation where they get away with paying no tax, and then talk about how we fix it. So 1 in 3 big corporations in this country pays no tax at all, right? Pays $0 tax. And in the coal and gas sector, it's closer to 1 in 2 big corporations paying no tax. They make donations to Labor and Liberal, and in return, they get the tax laws written in ways that benefit them. To give you an example of a company that pays no tax, ExxonMobil, big multinational, brought in $15 billion in 1 year in revenue and paid no tax on it. So if you paid tax, if anyone watching this paid tax, because you get tax taken out of your wage, if you have any other kind of job, you paid more tax than a multinational may have in a given year. So we say that's wrong.
Yeah.
And what we said is we need to fix it and close those loopholes. And we've had our policies in this regard, our proposals independently costed by the Parliamentary Budget Office. And they're based on ideas that happen in other countries and also proposals that have been put up in Australia before. So let me give you sort of 2 examples, like 2 practical examples about how you could fix our system to make these corporations pay more tax. Most of the gas corporations that make billions in profits sending gas offshore, they don't even pay for the gas itself. So they don't pay what's called royalties on it. And the tax law is meant to make them pay royalties, but they don't. You can change the tax law to say you've got to pay for the gas that you're getting out. You've got to pay a minimum of royalties. That brings in revenue. These gas corporations have huge amounts of credits built up that allow them to pay no tax, you can wipe those credits. These are all practical proposals that have been floated by others. The Australian Tax Office calls the gas industry systemic non-payers of tax. So what we've said is, like, here's some practical ways that you could change the gas tax, for example. So you have to pay for your gas, and then you can't avoid that, because if you want to take the gas out of the ground, you can't avoid it. You have to pay for it, and you can't use these credits anymore that are banked up, because they're meaning that you avoid paying tax. And then they've got no choice; they'll have to do it. The second example about how we've designed it so that these corporations have to pay their tax, we're proposing what has been called a super profits tax before, or an excessive profits tax. The basic idea is that this tax applies to only 0.1% of the corporations in Australia. So not small business, not medium business, just the very large ones. And it's when they make profit that is over and above a normal and fair rate of return. And so in some places like the UK, they call that a windfall tax. Like if for whatever reason, for example, Russia invades the Ukraine and gas prices soar through the roof, all of a sudden they start making massive amount of money out of the high gas prices. And so they say, in those instances, when you're making above normal profits, we're gonna make them pay a proportion of tax on that. And so there'll still get to be profitable corporations. I suspect Apple will still want to sell iPhones in Australia because they'll be able to make money. They'll still make a profit. Just when you get into that excessive profit territory, you have to take a little bit of cream off the top. So these proposals, we've designed them in a way that say, well, you're going to continue to operate, but you're just going to have to start paying your fair share. And this idea that they would, and you design it in a way that they can't get out of it, okay? And so, and if we have to give the tax office more resources to go after them, then we give the tax office more resources to go after them. But we've been thoughtful about this. We've looked at international experience. We've looked at suggestions from experts here in Australia, and we've put forward a proposal that's been independently costed by the Parliamentary Budget Office. All up, over a decade, it brings in over $500 billion. And that goes a long way to funding the services that people need.
Yeah. Given how you were saying that Labor and Liberal receive donations and they've been hesitant to implement any of these types of changes, if you were able to form a minority government, how hopeful are you that you could make Labor make these changes?
Look, I think I'm quite hopeful because I think they're popular. I think people, like when we say to people, you pay more tax than a multinational, and one in three big corporations in this country pays no tax at all, and the gas corporations get their gas for free. And when we say to people, like in Western Australia, for example, because they don't even have to pay royalties for the gas, these gas corporations, WA motorists pay more in car rego than the gas corporations pay in gas tax, right? And so when you explain this to people, like people are like, that's wrong. I think people intuitively get that something's wrong. And so I think it would be a really popular move. And yep, they won't do it unless they're pushed. Like you're right, like that's the case. But I think it would be a very popular move. And I think when you can link it to what people will get for it, like that from this, it means we don't have to ask everyday people to pay more. It means they're going to be able to get dental into Medicare, or it means they're going to be able to see the GP for free. I think it'll be incredibly, incredibly popular. And we know that the government's getting advice from their own departments that this is wrong, and the tax office is saying, hang on, they're serial non-payers of tax. So I think from our perspective, that I think the forces are aligning to say these corporations are taking the country for a ride. And I think when people understand what you get for it, I feel optimistic about being able to get governments to shift on it.
Is it at all frustrating, or what is the experience like of having these policies that are seen as radical or unpopular until the major parties finally go, oh, actually, maybe they are, possible. They're not impossible like we've been saying. What's that like for you? Because I imagine that would be incredibly frustrating to day in and day out hear that.
Oh, look, I actually think it's part of the reason that we're there, right?
Yeah.
It's like I've seen this in my time in Parliament on marriage equality, for example. We were
Mm.
the only ones saying, let's remove discrimination from our marriage laws and have marriage equality. And Labor and Liberal were saying no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no, no, until they said yes. Similarly, with an anti-corruption commission, we're the only ones. I introduced the first bill for an anti-corruption commission in the House of Representatives, and we were the only ones pushing for it. They kept saying no, 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 no until they say yes. And like I feel like we've got. Um, I don't feel it as frustrating. I feel it as we've actually made the change that we were put there for. And the most important thing is how the change happens rather than how it happens, I
Mm.
guess. So and again, like I think a flip side, a different way of putting that is that uh, we can't keep voting for the same two parties and
Yeah.
expecting a different result. Like
Mm.
if they keep getting the first preference votes, Labor and Liberal, then it's just going to be more of the same.
Yeah.
And so conversely, like when we're in there pushing in a minority parliament, even outside of a minority parliament, noting of course that we've got pretty strong representation in the Senate and are going to be needed to pass laws. When we're in there, we can keep putting these ideas up and pushing them. That's how it gets done. And I guess I'm less worried about who gets the credit for it.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it sounds like that's more of a noble way of thinking about it. You know, it's not about having the Greens be seen as these heroes. It's about can we push things forward. With housing, for instance, I know the Greens have been big proponents of rent caps and rent freezes and wanting to remove the kind of negative gearing tax benefits. Kind of a couple questions on that, and you might disagree with my first premise. It seems to be the case that when we look internationally, rent caps and rent freezes do protect renters, but it lowers supply. And also, negative gearing, as much as we are paying incredible, subsidies to property investors, when Labor did try and take it to the elections, they lost. That wasn't the only reason they lost, but it seemed fairly unpopular. And you might disagree on this, if we agree that rent caps and rent freezes do temporarily limit supply with the goal of fixing the system and protecting renters in the long run, what would the Greens do to ensure that young people aren't temporarily, suffering more until the system fixes itself or you're able to fix the system? And how do you get rid of something like negative gearing, which is just so politically popular amongst property investors?
Yeah, so a lot in those questions.
Yeah.
Let's try and unpack it. Um, in the 1980s, it cost 3 times the average income to buy a home. Now it's 8 times the average income and rising. In the 1990s, end of 1990s, John Howard changed the tax laws in a way that basically turbocharged house prices in this country. And what he introduced was not only negative gearing, which previously existed, but he introduced a thing called capital gains tax discount.
Mm.
What does that mean? Well, you put those two things together, and it means in practice this happens. A renter or first home buyer turns up to an auction with whatever they've been able to save to buy a property. Next to them is a wealthy property investor who can bid the price up and up and up, out past what the renter and first home buyer can afford, knowing that they've got a big check from the government in their pocket, because while they own the property, if they rent it out and make a loss, they can write that off as a tax
Mm.
loss. That's negative gearing. But then when they sell the property in a few years' time, they only have to pay half their tax rate on it. And that's John Howard's capital gains tax discount. So if they make a $500,000 profit on selling it, they don't have to pay tax on the full 500,000 effectively. And you don't get that if you're doing a hospo job or a retail job. You don't get to a 50% discount on your tax rate, but these property investors do. And so all up, all of those tax concessions cost the budget $180 billion over the decade. And that is money that is going to push up house prices out of reach of renters and first home buyers. And the experts say this is sitting there just like overheating this housing market.
Mm.
What are we going to do? We've got to defuse John Howard's time bomb. And so what we've put on the table is a proposal that does it we think in a fair way that addresses some of those political concerns that you've raised. We say if you've got one investment property in addition to your family home, you get to keep the arrangements, but the existing tax arrangements, because you may have got advice from your accountant or financial planner about how to prepare for your retirement. Sometimes these are called mum and dad investors. So one property. But what we're saying is that for this, like second and above, like if you want to buy 15 properties, then okay, no one's going to stop you, but don't expect a tax handout from the government to do it, especially if it's coming at the cost of renters and first home buyers. I think what hurt Labor in that election that you were talking about a while ago is actually Clive Palmer's advertising spend.
Yeah.
If people can recall it, like Palmer was everywhere, but he wasn't promoting himself. He was just running attack ads against Bill Shorten, right? And so, and I think, and Labor's own review after that election said that that's what really hurt them that election. But in any event, I think it's like things are so much worse now. Things are so much worse now. House prices have gone up 50% in the last 5 years, and wages have only gone up 15%. And I have parents and grandparents coming to me and saying, look, even though they might have benefited from this system, they understand something needs to change because they're now looking at their kids and their grandkids and saying something needs to change because the tax system is out of whack and it's not working in a way that's fair. So we're putting on the table something that's fair. Why is it that we could get it done now while the housing crisis is so much worse and getting worse by the day? And this is something that would make a practical difference. But to come to your the final bit of your question, like you've got to do a bunch of things at once to ensure that people don't fall through the cracks. And we're saying really three things. So one is start reforming the tax handouts in a way that's fair to younger generations, but also respects the situation that some small investors might have got themselves in. Second is cap how much rents can go up by. One of the things that I do, I guess I'd challenge a little bit something that you said is like we've got limits in the ACT at the moment about how much rents can go up by, and the sky hasn't fallen in, right? And they exist in other countries where housing is seen as more of a human right rather than like a speculation stock market. And so if we start treating it as an essential in the way we treat power bills, it makes sense to say we're going to regulate how much rents are able to go up by. The third is government needs to get back in the business of building public housing and building homes at a rate that people can afford to rent and buy. One of the big problems that we've got is the government has stopped building public housing, and so that just increases the competition at the lower end of the market, right? And has the effect of pushing rents up. And so we're pushing for a really big and urgent build over the next 10 years of over 600,000 homes tilted towards renting, like the majority being in the rental space, so that where you could rent it at 25% of your income. Because I think basic law of supply and demand is like build much more affordable properties at the lower end, and you're going to start to deal with some of these things. And let's get started now. Like governments used to build public housing, and they can get back into it again. So I think do those three things and you address the problems that you've raised.
With when it comes to building so much more social and affordable housing or just properties that people can even afford to be able to rent, is that possible? Is that 600,000 feasible given the skilled worker and material shortage, or is this kind of also based on the hope that we fix that issue? You know, government should be able to walk and chew gum at the same side. Is that alongside, or could we do that now if the government really wanted to?
Yeah, I think we could do that now. And I think, yes, we may need to take some steps to increase in training of the workforce, which is why, like for us, free TAFE and uni is a central part of what we're proposing. But one of the things that when we talk to people in the housing sector, one of the things they tell us is that it's a boom and bust industry, and so what they look ahead 12 months and they say, okay, well things might be tight now, but we can see a drop off in applications coming in 12 months. What are we going to do? Part of the reason about having big government investment in there is that you can almost be, I guess, counter-cyclical in a way, but you can actually plan. You can say, right, well, there's going to be a steady build of housing so that in those times when you say that there's a downturn in the private sector for whatever reasons, well, the government sector is going to step in and do it. But the other thing we would say is that to the extent that there is a finite workforce and skills capacity in Australia, governments backing new coal and gas projects and massive new construction projects in other areas, that competes with resources, right? And so competes with those and competes with investment. So we're saying really clearly, let's stop putting government money into things like opening up new coal and gas and construction of new polluting industries, and let's put it into things like housing. And that way you don't have those competition for labour.
Yeah. One of the I guess one of the scapegoats of the housing crisis has been this idea of immigration, that governments will say that we need skilled immigration. Immigration helps the economy, and then you will have some people who take the argument that it is, robbing Aussies of their housing. I guess what's the Greens' kind of position on the rhetoric that's been spread about immigration currently?
Oh, look, we're not going to join in the race bottom and blaming migrants for a crisis that they didn't cause. The housing crisis has been decades in the making, and it's precisely because governments don't want to build more public housing and don't want to look at reforming the $180 billion in handouts to wealthy property investors that they're looking for scapegoats. And we've seen this play out in the US, where it's migrants and diversity initiatives that are the fault of everything. And meanwhile, the billionaires line up at Trump's inauguration and clap him. And you can see who he's delivering for, and you can see who he's trying to blame for these crises. So we're not going to join in blaming migrants for a problem that they didn't cause when we know what the causes are. But secondly, I would say also, if migration was the cause, why didn't house prices drop massively when we had COVID, when there was zero migration into the country? We've had these periods of no migration, and house prices continued to rise. It's because there's this massive fire underneath them that John Howard lit, former Liberal Prime Minister John Howard lit, and that we've got to now work out a way of getting out of. But it's been pretty unedifying to sit in Parliament and watch Liberal and Labor each say, oh no, our migration cuts are bigger than yours, and start talking about housing in the context of migration when we know where the real problems lie, and it's just they haven't been willing to tackle them.
Yeah, we touched on a bit on the US there and seeing, Donald Trump come to power. And what we've seen in the United States is you've had that more extremist leadership, but sadly you've seen a lot of young men also start to kind of swing to that direction, and the data doesn't quite indicate the same thing is going to be happening here. But for those kind of disenfranchised young men who are feeling hopeless in Australia and might start getting pulled in that more conservative, slightly extreme direction, what do you say to them?
Yeah, I think we've got to offer hope, and I think we've got to say, look, here's who's actually creating the crises that are impacting on you at the moment. And the cost of living crisis is real. The housing crisis is real, especially for younger people at the moment. I mean, it's not only a generational thing, but younger people tend to have less time, less wealth, lower paying jobs. And so, but groceries cost the same and rent costs the same. So it's really, really biting for people. And I think one of the things that we continue to do is say, well, look, no, hang on. It's actually, if you want to look at the underlying causes of what is making your life so tough at the moment, look at how much house prices are going up. Look at look at who's benefiting from it. Look at the fact that big corporations, the share of the economy going to corporate profits is never been higher. It's growing, and they're putting up the price of everything. And so I think this, when we talk to people and say 1 in 3 big corporations pays no tax under Labor and Liberal, do you think that's fair? It's actually an immediate way of connecting. People go, yeah, I think that's wrong. What can we do about it? Is there a way of fixing it? So I think that economic dislocation, the economic pressure that a lot of people are feeling, it's caused by the Trumps and the Duttons and their billionaire and corporate mates. And then they come in and they try and feed off the disaffection, right? And use it for their own advantages. And I think the circuit breaker is to say, no, look at who is actually causing the problems. Look at who Trump and Dutton, etc., are aligned with, and we, the Greens, want to take them on, and that's going to make your life better.
Yeah, I guess moving to older Aussies now. So when I told my dad's in his mid-70s, when I told him that I was going to have an interview with you, he said, and I quote, "If the Greens ever got into power, it would be the end of civilization as we know it." I guess, what do you kind of say to those older Aussies who have this perception of you as these like more radical, like extremist types?
Well, I would say Labor and Liberal are doing a pretty good job at driving us there by themselves.
Yeah.
Like at the moment, we are hitting 1.5 degrees of global warming. Labor has approved over 30 new coal and gas projects. Dutton wants even more, an extra 2 billion tonnes of pollution as a result of Dutton's dangerous nuclear fantasy that's actually just about keeping coal and gas in the system for even longer. Whereas he talks about, talking about the end of civilization, we're witnessing fires and floods now as we speak, and a climate crisis that is getting worse. And Labor and Liberal are acting as if nothing's wrong, and we can keep opening up new coal and gas projects. Like emissions aren't coming down under this government, not in any meaningful way. And then, meanwhile, even outside of climate and environment, as we just spent a long time talking about housing, it's like, can you really say Labor and Liberal are coming up with policies that are going to make housing affordable for people? But we just had them give their national launches and made housing the centrepiece. And the day after it, the experts all came out and said, these are a dumpster fire of bad ideas. But between them, Labor and Liberal, Labor will push up house prices by 8% and Liberals by 15%. Like this is so. I guess I would say to your dad and to anyone else like it, it's like, well, how are things going at the moment under Labor and Liberal? Like, are they setting our country up for the future? Are they making the reforms that are needed to ensure we don't go down the US style road? Of becoming a society where the gap between the haves and the have-nots just keeps growing. So I would say that, to me, what's extreme is in a wealthy country like ours, people skipping meals because they can't afford to pay the rent. Or I think that what's extreme is people not being able to get the healthcare they need, while billionaires in Australia doubled their wealth over the last 6 years and made $67,000 an hour. I would say, to me, that's extreme. And so I would say in many respects, things aren't working at the moment for a large chunk of people, and we want to fix that. And that's about protecting civilization as we know it.
Yeah, look, I think that'll be a good clip to show them at the dinner table. That'll be a fun conversation for me to have. I know we're kind of getting to the end of the amount of time I had with you. I'll ask just kind of one more. This is from my girlfriend, because I don't know much about this space, but she does. The average endometriosis diagnosis takes about 7 years to obtain, and research into medical health and services for females is lacking. What would the Greens do to support female-centered healthcare?
This is a real issue, and it's why the Greens pushed for and led under our spokesperson, Senator Larissa Waters from Queensland, a major Senate inquiry into women's health and into women's reproductive health. And there is widespread medical misogyny, and there is undiagnosis or misdiagnosis of conditions like endo, and it's like the stories that we heard during it, very similar to your girlfriend's, but people just being dismissed by their GPs, people being, we've even seen people women who've been prescribed drugs during the course of their pregnancy and having adverse reactions to them, then being institutionalized and put in mental health wards in hospitals. So it's a huge problem. And there's a number of things that can be done, and we've been pushing for, as one example, we've been pushing for 12 days of reproductive leave that everyone in society would be entitled to, but would allow for things like when you're experiencing like acute endo, for example, or period pain, like to be able to have it treated, like understood as being something that requires you being able to take some time off to go and look after yourself. Proper funding for a change in the way that GPs think about health and reproductive issues, so that women aren't turned away when they front up. Making it more affordable to be able to access the care that women need. All of these things across the board have been part of a comprehensive plan that the Greens have been pushing for some time. This is an area that we're pleased that, coming back to this question about how do we get things done, that the government has taken a bit of a step towards some of the things that we've been pushing for. It took them a really long time to respond to our Senate inquiry, but our Senate report, but eventually they did, and there's been some steps towards it, which we've applauded. But I think like this is one of those things that I'm really pleased to see now greater public discussion about, and it's one of those areas that I think if we keep pushing, we're going to get some changes to our laws, changes to our funding system, so that women's health and women's reproductive health in particular is treated as a key and core health policy issue in this country. Because that story of that experience of your girlfriends is shared by millions across the country.
Yeah.
It hasn't had its proper place in health policy.
Yeah, no, she was lucky. She hasn't had that experience of waiting 7 years. She hasn't had that, but just that's the average number, I believe it is,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what people are experiencing. Is there one final thing you would want to say to young Australians for as they go to this election?
Look, this is a once in a generation chance to get the parliament to act on the issues that are affecting people. There's 7 million renters across the country at this election. Gen Z and millennials are now the biggest voting bloc. We have a situation in this country where less than a third of the country votes for the government, a bit more than a third votes for the opposition, and about a third votes for someone else. And we're heading towards what experts say is going to be minority parliament, where the government's going to have to come and talk to this big and growing crossbench. This is our chance to get some of these big issues on the table, get some generational fairness back in the system by tackling housing, cost of living, and the root causes of it. And look, we may not get everything done in one parliament. We may not get all these policies implemented, but last time we had a minority parliament, the Greens got dental into Medicare for under 18s, for example, and that's benefited 3 million people across the country. And if we can even get one of these big reforms over the line, it's going to set people up in a way that otherwise the problem will just keep getting worse. And I guess the flip side of that is that we can't keep voting for the same two parties and expecting a different result. Like nothing changes if nothing changes. And so this time around, by voting one Greens, preferencing Labor above the Liberals, we get to keep Peter Dutton out and put some pressure in there to get Labor to act. And I think I really am really excited that in a few short weeks, we could actually be sending this country in a really different progressive direction.
Amazing. Thank you very much for sitting down and having a conversation with me.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much.